Thanks very much for joining the webinar, second of Build Visible's webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can effectively measure content performance. Before we get started, a couple of minor sort of admin points. Everyone in the webinar is currently muted and chat is disabled. However, you can still submit questions to us using the Q&A feature. So if you want to send us a question, hopefully we'll have some time left at the end of the webinar where we're going to run through some of those questions and yeah, have a little bit of a discussion. But yeah, for now, I think we are, yeah, we're good to get going. So give me just a moment. Okay. Let me just start sharing my screen. Give me 1 minute. Okay, sorry about that. A few minor technical hitches, but yeah, hopefully now you can see us. So let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about effectively measuring content performance. This is something that we get asked about all the time on the analytics team. It's a really interesting set of challenges. So yeah, we're going to be running through that today. A few intros, first of all, from our side. My name is Tom. I head up the analytics team here at Build Visible. I have spoken about analytics, Tag Manager, and Data Studio, and various related things at Brighton SEO and SMX as well. I'm a front-end developer, and you can find me on Twitter here as well. So yeah, please do tweet me any questions after the webinar as well. And I'm going to be running this webinar with my colleague Richard. He is one of the analytics consultants on the analytics team here at Build Visible. He's a specialist in Data Studio, so content performance and reporting rebuilds are really his day-to-day specialism. So he's going to be running a fair bit of this webinar when we get into the weeds of content performance. He's worked at EE, Haymarket, and Sky, and he is likewise on Twitter. So you can see his handle there. So in terms of an agenda for today, first of all, I'm going to run through a bit of stuff on the positioning of integrity and relevance of data, just because it really is critical to all good analysis, but particularly when you come to customized implementations, it's very, very important that you're aware of the quality of your data and the importance of measurement planning. So we're going to touch on that first, but then we're going to get into 3 specific challenges, which will hopefully sum up some of the most common problems that people come to us with and get a bit of an interesting discussion going. So these are people actually reading my content? What can I track as a conversion aside from the normal commercial KPIs? And then how can we start to apply these ideas at scale or on historic data? We'll then move on to a bit of a few points on Data Studio and how to actually make data useful, make it insightful, get it into the hands of the right people. And then we will move on to a Q&A. So we'll get started. As I said, integrity and relevance underpins all of the analytics work that we do here at Build Visible. So if you're to make good decisions based on your web analytics software, you need to be confident that the data has integrity and it has relevance. So just to dive into what I mean by that, I like to view all implementations on this kind of spectrum. So we've got the integrity spectrum along the bottom there, the x-axis, and we've got the relevance spectrum on the y-axis on the left. So if you start with, for example, an out-the-box standard implementation of Google Analytics, modern tracking code and so on, you can be pretty confident that the data it's giving you is going to be accurate for the most part. That said, Google Analytics is the most widely used web analytics software in the world. It's obviously takes a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's not going to be answering the specific questions that you have about the performance of your website. It's not relevant to you out the box, even if it has integrity. A lot of work that we do often starts with implementations that sit around here. So this is where there's historically been no investment in data. There's very little ability to measure our ROI, and the performance of content in particular. Not only has it not been a concern, it's not something that people are even aware they can measure. So yeah, that's a challenging place to start from, but something we do a lot of. And sometimes you see implementations round about here in the top left as well, which is where there's clearly a good strategy for measurement. There's been a lot of thought put into it, but because of it might be the lack of a consistent measurement plan, or stakeholders haven't been managed effectively, or there's lots of people pushing stuff into the tag manager container. It doesn't have integrity. There's technical issues that obscure the insight, which is why we are always trying to push up and to the right in this kind of spectrum. So we want to see investment in data. We want to help organizations get reliable business insight. And in order to do that, in order to get the integrity and the relevance, you really need to start right at the beginning. So right back at the data collection phase at the page level. And that is because if you invest in data collection, you'll reap the rewards later on when it comes to the value of the insights that you can get out of it. It doesn't matter how many segments you build or how many custom reports you make in Google Analytics. If you haven't invested in data collection, if you haven't thought about customizing your implementation around your website, you're not going to be getting the information that you need. So you need to start right at the beginning here with data collection. And where that really begins for us, Build Visible, we always start with the idea of measurement planning. That underpins everything that we do. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Richard, and he's going to talk a little bit about measurement planning and specifically how we apply it to the performance of content and measuring the impact of content. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks. So yeah, we're going to go straight into what is a measurement plan. So the sort of definition of measurement plan is it's a translation of your business objectives into measurable metrics on your website. It's a structured approach to a customized implementation of your web analytics. Not only will having this in place be a sort of vital first step to having a meaningful customization, there's also like a fantastic way to get buy-in from your business and to sort of ensure that you're demonstrating the value of your content efforts, as we sort of shall see. So here's what I prepared earlier. So as you can see, for my content strategy, I'm looking at 3 main objectives. So to drive revenue, which is probably quite standard for most of you, but also to drive a social following and to keep customers retained. So each of these objectives should have a key performance indicator, KPI. So this is the primary metric you'll be measuring the success on. So for revenue, it'll be revenue. For social following, here I've chosen Twitter followers, and for customer retention, newsletter sign-ups. So you can then have some secondary metrics. So these are sort of optional. These metrics might either be a direct effect of if you increase your primary metric, you would want to see these secondary metrics increase, or this could be the secondary metric will help you understand if the primary metric is working or not. All of these objectives should fit into your overall sort of business objectives. This will sort of help support and get buy-in from the rest of the business. But there's one thing to mention, like building out a full measurement plan, it can be a complex process. There's a lot of technical scoping involved and getting data layers, and these will all require a custom implementation of your tool. But like what we're not going to do today is cover how to actually do the technical implementation. Instead, we're just going to focus on the principles that can be applied from a measurement plan to your content, and help you build out your content strategies and understand how your content is performing. So leading on to that, the first question we're going to look at today is, are users actually reading my content? So this is one we hear a lot, and there's a lot of like out of the box metrics for engagement. So You have bounce rate, which is a single hit session, so people landing on your website and then leaving on that same page. It doesn't always have to be a negative thing. Someone could have found what they're looking for, or they could have just not been engaged to go on. So another metric is exit rate, similar to bounce rate, but this is looking at the percentage of people that have left the page. So this would be great if it's your confirmation page and your checkout, but it's not as good if it's the first step on a 5-step article. You've also got time on page, which is measuring how long someone spent on a page. Again, an out-of-the-box implementation of this, if a hit isn't then sent again to GA, there isn't a timestamp for GA to measure this. We then have pages per session, so this is looking at how long people have, how many pages people have looked at during their visit. If someone's got a high pages per session, they could have got lost, or they could have been reading loads of content. But what I'm getting at is engagement metrics are flawed. If you're looking at them in isolation, you're not going to get a true understanding. And unless you sort of understand these metrics as well, it's probably not best to use them as a KPI straight away until you're happy with what you're measuring. The good news is we can define our own. We don't have to use standard engagement metrics from Google Analytics. Google Tag Manager, for instance, gives us the granular control to measure what we want. We can fire a tag, which fires an event to Google Analytics when an element is seen. So this could be when someone sees a call to action. If you've got this firing to GA, you can then actually look at conversion rate of people that have seen the call to action versus people that have clicked. Sometimes someone might land on your site and not see that call to action. So if you look at all page views versus that call to action, it's not going to be accurate. We can also sort of use scroll depth, so looking at how far people get down a page. We can look at specific interactions, so this could be people using the related post carousel, it could be people interacting with a quiz you've got on the article. We can actually sort of start defining a more accurate time on page. With using the timer feature in GTM, we can send hits, so GA will be getting hits and will be able to work out that time on page. But the good news as well is we can start combining these triggers. You don't just have to look at scroll rate, or you don't have to just look at time on page. Let's say you've got sort of lots of long form content and it's getting really high bounce rate. What you can start sort of looking at is if people get to a certain scroll depth in a certain amount of time, then fire an event instead. This will stop people that have landed on the page and scrolled all the way down to the bottom to find out how long it is. And it will also stop people that are there going to do some research and they've opened up multiple tabs and they've forgotten about your tab and they come back 2 hours later. The session still hasn't expired yet and that time looks like they spent 2 hours on the page, but they haven't. With this, we fire an event to GA. We can track this as a goal and then we can start building into segments to look at what these users are doing or bucket it for further analysis. We can go one step further, like with time on page, we can start looking at creating our own custom metric around it. When I'm reading blog posts, I'm always there scrolling, sort of highlighting text, clicking around, as some of you might also do. So what we can start doing is build an engagement timer. Each time one of these actions happen, we add 5 minutes to the timer. And then once there's no action, it will just pause the timer. This will result in an actual time of people being engaged versus people just sitting on the site. You can then compare this to your actual time on page and work out, okay, how long are people actually engaged with the content versus how long are people maybe sitting there reading it or have they gone off to another tab. This is all thanks to Simo Abba. He's written a blog on how you can actually set this up in GTM, but it's just a really good custom metric to sort of have in your portfolio. Other things to consider, sort of looking at page features, so like we mentioned, quiz or video tracking, the call to action, these can all fire events into GA. You can also look at word count and pull this in, so you can actually factor in the article length when you're looking at time on page. You can look at behavior. Instead of looking at pages per session, let's look at article pages per session. User type, are the users reading your content registered? What channels are they coming through? With that sort of understanding, you start bucketing and looking at different trends with these different users. And this is sort of everything you can do around the sort of engagement stuff. And again, going back to measurement plan, this should all be custom to your business. And looking at your content, you need to decide what is the best way to track this. But then moving on from engagement, one of the things we can start looking at is how do we track conversions? Like depending on the purpose of your content, there'll be different conversions you might want to track. And these don't necessarily have to be purchase a product. On our blog post, for instance, as people are sort of reading the page, they get down to a point and a newsletter sign up pops up. What we're trying to do is get people to sign up for our newsletter. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And this way we can sort of start looking at this as a conversion. Returning this to your measurement plan, one of the sort of good representations of this is looking at progression through the funnel. If someone's going from an awareness stage to an initial consideration, they might be clicking on a CTA to the commercial page, or signing up to your newsletter, or sharing it on social. These are all things that can be tracked as a conversion. You can also try and sort of start tagging up the negative or the abandonment. What are you trying to get people to avoid doing? If they visit a 404 page, you could fire an event. And what this will start allowing us to do is setting them up as goals and finding conversion rates. So how much of your traffic going to the site are performing these actions? And these can then go into your sort of objectives and fit into your measurement plan of, I want to actually decrease the conversion rate or increase it on certain actions. Another sort of weird thing for some of you to do would be assigning a value to the non-commercial interactions. For us, if someone signs up to a newsletter, we could say that's worth £5 to us because we understand how much we can get back to that. And having this in place will start allowing you to get buy-in from the business. When you are asking for a certain amount of budget, and you can actually say, okay, we get this much in actual product revenue, but we also have all of these softer conversions that are happening, which we value at this amount. And you start getting a return on investment from your measurement plan and from your content. I know we said we wouldn't sort of talk about the technical implementation here, but one of the important things is if you start getting development team buy-in as well, you've got your measurement plan in place. The data collection process is a lot easier. You've justified why you need the tracking by having your measurement plan. Instead of just saying, I want to track this button, you can say, I need to track this button because it goes into my measurement plan. For any of you that have used GTM before, you might understand this. This is a tag where we're trying to tag that subscribe button, but if you aren't working with your dev team, it can become quite a long process to find something unique to track onto. Whereas if you're working with your dev team, you can ask them to send a simple event into GTM, which will make the process a lot simpler and also ensure that there's integrity and relevance there, and that it doesn't break whenever a new dev change is made. You can even take this to the next level. These actions or these conversions, they can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. For instance, conversions don't even need to happen online to be tracked. If you have key interactions taking place offline or in your CRM, you can sort of look at pushing these into GA using the measurement protocol, as long as you have a key to sort of join this data together. What this starts unlocking is commercial interactions beyond sort of the website can then actually be tied back to how we've sort of acquired this user. Did they come through social? Did they come through email? Sort of understanding that can then help the marketing team as well. What we're trying to say is working with your dev team, you can actually get as granular sort of integration as you need for your business. And what we're going to look at next is sort of we now understand how to track engagement and conversions, and we sort of hopefully have a better idea of our measurement plan, and this should start taking effect. So let's start looking at how we can then take this and apply it on scale. Looking at data in isolation, looking at sort of one article can be a bit tedious. You can't find insights quickly. If you sort of analyze all the content on your site page by page, it's going to take you a long time. So what you can start doing is start integrating your site's taxonomy into your tracking. The structure and the purpose of your content should be informing your tracking. If you, for instance, are setting, you can use your site sections, you can use content type. In this example, even though Game of Thrones is now over, we've used authors, and you can see the Game of Thrones characters there. With this sort of information, you can start bucketing it. You can understand if certain areas of your website are performing better than others. You can understand if long form content is performing, is getting higher engagement rate than the short form, which you'll hope so. If you do want to sort of understand more about content grouping, Tom has written an article about how to get started with these. You are limited to 5 per view, which Tom will go through in his article, but this is a really good first step to take in sort of starting to group your content. We can also start looking at seasonal versus evergreen content. Seasonal content will be your more news related. This is providing relevant information in a timely manner. Here, for my example, you can see I've used my Q1 best new features roundup for Data Studio. Now, that's really useful in Q1, but in Q4, that's probably less relevant to people. And this is where evergreen content comes in. This is your content that's trying to always be relevant. Here we're using Tom's example of his guide to using Google Analytics. Now, as long as Google Analytics stays in place, which hopefully for my sake it does, otherwise I'm out of a job, then this content will always be relevant. However, this content might still need to be refreshed as time goes on. And this is where we start pulling things in like publish date. We can understand how much traffic did my content get in the first few days, few weeks, few months, few years. And we can sort of see if this starts dropping off, and this sort of data can then start informing your content strategy and working with your content team. So if you understand that your evergreen content has dropped off after 6 months, do we need to put more marketing behind it? Is it less relevant now? Does it need to be reworked? With the seasonal content, for instance, the Q1 roundup, could we now do a yearly roundup of these were the best new features of 2019? Or could we repurpose this into a top features for Data Studio and how to use them? All this content can be reused, and having the data behind it will start to allow us to actually make these decisions. One of the things though is if you are sort of at the early stages of investing in your data, then you might not have these custom implementations. A standard setup of GA will provide you with page and URL. And with this data, you can start actually tying this back to your CMS, or if you can pull this data another way, you can still get this insights. I wrote an article a while back on retroactive content analysis in GA. This is tying back that data to your GA. So here we sort of looked at, okay, we didn't have this data tracked, so I was like, we want to understand what the content type is, so measurement, what the author was, who was me, and the publish date. So once we've identified that data that we need, if it's on the site, we can then go and use Screaming Frog and XPath to extract this, or there might be other methods. What you need to do is be able to get this data without always relying on GA. If you have an SEO team, it's worth speaking to them for a way, or your dev team might have a way to pull this out as well. But what we want to do here is combine the data. We're not relying at the initial step of having GA fully set up. We're still able to start looking at content analysis and content performance without having a custom implementation. Once we have the data around the author and the publish date, we can then match it up with GA, either in Excel or Google Sheets, or even Data Studio or Data Blender. And that sort of leads us on quite nicely into how do we actually make this data useful? It's wonderful to have all this data, but if no one's looking at it, then you aren't going to get the return out of it. Whether you have monthly OKR meetings and you want to start bringing these, your measurement plan as your objectives and looking at this data each month, you need to be able to access it at ease and quickly. This is where we're going to move on to Data Studio. So as you might remember from the intro, I'm a big fan of Data Studio, and it's because it allows quick access to the data. You don't have to be an expert. Once these are set up, everyone's going to be working off one set of data. There's one source of truth. Here, for this example, I've used Star Wars. And what we're looking at here is content versus non-content. So for the KPIs, we're looking at how many of our total sessions are content sessions, how many of the page views, how much revenue has been driven by our content. We've got our average engagement time on there, which we can see is a lot lower than the total. So what's going on here is the content not engaging enough. We can see it's got a higher bounce rate, but it's also got a lot higher average order value. So people that are reading the content are more engaged and spending more money. Once we sort of have this in place, we can actually break down content a lot easier. So moving on, another important thing to make this data useful is collaboration between the teams. As we've mentioned, if you've got dev buy-in, it makes it easier to do the data collection. But if what you need is the content team to be looking at this data, analysts will be great at building out the measurement plan with you and creating the dashboards and pulling reports, but it's the content teams that will have the understanding around the data and know what they can do with that data. Repurposing the content like we talked about with seasonal and evergreen. This is where the collaboration is really important. And again, bringing this into your content strategies. If you've got all this data and you understand how content's performing and what's doing well and what's not, then this should be informing your content strategies. And once you've sort of gone through the process of creating content strategy, you might realize you need more data to be collected in your measurement plan. And this is where we sort of go back into reiterating on your measurement plan. It's all good having all this data and having a plan, but you don't want to go back to being at the legacy implementation stage. We don't want to sort of spend all this time and effort getting there to then go all the way back. So yeah, hopefully this will help build out your measurement plans, and hopefully you can start getting sort of buy-in for your content and understanding how it's performing. Thank you. Great.
Thanks, Richard. Brilliant. Let's now have a look at the Q&A, see if we've got some good questions to be cracking on with. So, okay, so here's an interesting one. I'm a part of the content team, and our work is judged on e-commerce conversion rate and on bounce rate. How do you go about changing expectations? So this is an interesting one, and this is one of the most interesting challenges, I think, when it comes to analytics in larger organizations. It's about affecting organizational change as much as it is about implementing any necessary new tracking. Because quite often what we see is that if there has been a long history of producing content without any real particular purpose or goal in mind, what will have happened is it will be judged on KPIs that happen to be available, not KPIs that were set up for the purpose of that content and that organization. So in this instance, e-commerce conversion rate, so we're judging it based on direct commercial KPIs, and on bounce rate, which, as Richard alluded to earlier, is not a great measure of engagement. It's simply a measure of single hit sessions. So in terms of changing expectations, I find it's often as much about educating people as to what it's possible to do with Google Analytics. In many cases, people simply aren't aware that it's possible to do things like to come up with an arbitrary engagement metric that factors in things like engagement time on page and scroll depth and visibility versus click-through or call to actions, all that kind of stuff. People don't know that can be done. So it can be quite an exciting process, getting everyone around a table and sort of hashing out a measurement plan. And that's something that I think is really powerful about getting cross-departmental buy-in on a measurement plan. It's because if you have the marketing team, the analytics team, and the development team agreeing on a structure and a process for analytics, that's your opportunity to push through any necessary new tracking features that you think would help you to demonstrate the value of your team and of your team's efforts and output. If you really want to be demonstrating engagement, then get buy-in on that as a KPI. Get that baked into your measurement plan, and then you are then empowered to get the necessary development time to push that through and to have the data to back yourself up, basically. So yeah, that's really what I would try and push for: measurement planning and hopefully educating different teams on what's possible. So let's go back to the questions again. Let's find it. Actually, this one leads on quite nicely from the previous question. So we struggle to get resource dedicated to analytics for tracking code changes because we can't demonstrate ROI. How do we sell this in? This is a classic problem, and it's always a frustrating one to run into as an analyst because, you know, often in organizations where there are very large development teams with, you know, enormous budgets for on-site changes and very carefully planned sprint processes, you can't get a tracking code change pushed through for 6 months or so. And that, I completely feel the frustration there. So in terms of how to sort of sell this in, there's a couple of different things I want to touch on. First of all, the advantage of Tag Manager. Obviously, this is often sort of sold in as a way to make tracking changes without dev time. And to be honest, I think that can sometimes be quite a dangerous way to view Tag Manager, because the worst Tag Manager implementations I've ever worked on have been ones where it's been used as a backdoor to sidestep the development team. Really, what you want is to get to a process where you have a data layer in place, which has all the information that you could possibly need. And then Tag Manager changes basically involve adding new tags and reconfiguring how you talk to the data layer, because that's typically far safer than just running loads of custom HTML code in your Tag Manager setup. But again, that's sort of an ideal world view of it. You know, I completely appreciate that. It may not be possible to get to that point where you have a data layer structure in place. You have a really careful process for rolling out Tag Manager containers. You have the necessary whitelists and blacklists in place for different tag types and so on. So let's say you don't have all that. What else can you do to demonstrate ROI? Something that I've often found to be quite effective is to understand the challenges that other teams are facing outside of your own. So what issues are the paid team or the SEO team having with their data? It's not necessarily just about what issues you're facing as a part of the content team. Speak to other members of other teams and see what challenges they're facing, what frustrations they have. Because in many cases, you'll find that there are issues which you would be able to tackle as part of the same sort of flow of work as the issues that you're looking to deal with. So we often see examples where you might get a mismatch, for example, between the revenue reported in the PPC team software and in Google Analytics, for example. You might get a mismatch between those numbers. So again, by moving over to a more measurement plan-based approach where you've got an understanding across your organization of the importance of data integrity, you can move over to a single source of truth. Again, that being a data layer where there is one source, agreed upon source for a particular piece of information, be that something behavioral. So how do we know when action X has been taken by the user? Or it could be more informational. So how do we know which category this product is from, for example? It's about getting a single source of truth. So yeah, those are a couple of ways that we often work with organizations to do that. So hopefully that's helpful. Probably got time for another one. Yeah, I think we do. So let's have a look at the questions again. Okay, so we talked a lot about data layers. We have a question here: how difficult is it to implement a data layer? That's a good question. So this will obviously vary massively depending on your infrastructure, what your site's built on, how you process these kind of changes. But I think it's important to remember that a data layer, really at its core, is something quite simple. It's basically, the best way to think of it is as almost like an API for your site. So it's like, it's a way that you can expose important information that is going to be relevant to your analytics setup, to your tracking pixels, any other kind of analytics software that you want to run. It's a way of exposing that information consistently and in a machine readable way. And again, it's not just about information, it's about interactions as well. So it's at its core, it's really just JavaScript. That's all it is. It's a JavaScript array full of information, nested information. Looks a bit like JSON, if you're familiar with that. Really, the challenges I have found of implementing a data layer isn't so much about getting it implemented in the first place, because in theory, it can be as simple as a few lines of code and teaching the CMS to read the relevant variables and sort of expose them in the data layer on the page. The real challenge is in maintaining a data layer. So making sure that anything which changes on your site which could impact your analytics, or anything which, any sort of time-sensitive campaigns that you're doing that you would want new information to be exposed in the data layer, making sure that becomes part of process. So making sure that there is someone in the development team who runs the necessary tests every time there's a push to the production site, and make sure that the information in the data layer is not compromised. Making sure that there's someone in the marketing team who understands how it works, and when you're setting up a new tag, for example, which variables to read from in the data layer. So it's about making it a core part of your organization's approach to analytics, and making sure that you have an understanding of exactly how it works, basically. Hopefully that answers your question. I think we are just about out of time now. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined this webinar. We're going to make a recording of it available afterwards. I should also mention that we're going to be running these monthly. So you can expect another webinar from us soon. I believe it is going to be one run by Olivia from our PR and outreach team. So you will receive an email about that, and yeah, keep an eye out. In the meantime, if you have any questions about anything that I've touched on, that Richard's touched on, my email is in the footer there. Alternatively, you can just contact us through the Built Visible website, and yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we will hopefully speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.